welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. The Deeper Thinking podcast is produced as an independent, ad-free project. Its episodes are digitally narrated to manage the demands of research and editing while ensuring each installment is engaging, ethically considered, and attentive to nuance. In recent weeks, the story of artificial intelligence has shifted. Not vanished, not collapsed, but shifted. After months of exuberance, a new tone has taken hold. A study out of MIT reported that the vast majority of generative AI projects inside companies, some 95%, are failing to deliver tangible results. No measurable revenue, no sustained productivity, just stalled pilots and unkept promises. The tools are still powerful, but the future they promised now feels strangely elusive. And yet, AI is everywhere, in warehouses and hospitals, schools and legal offices. So this is not a story about what AI might do. It is a story about what it is already doing and what that doing reveals. There was a promise once that AI would transform work, that it would automate the dull parts, accelerate the smart parts, and liberate people from the weight of inefficiency. And for a moment, that seemed close. Large language models could write emails, draft reports, even suggest ideas in brainstorms. But then the implementation began. And that's when the mirror cracked. The story told by executives was one of transformation. But the story told by users, the people actually meant to use these systems, was something quieter. Workflows became more convoluted. The time saved drafting a memo was lost fact-checking its mistakes. Integrating AI into everyday tasks required restructuring how teams operated, how data was shared, how trust was built. What looked like a shortcut turned into a loop. But the deeper truth isn't about failure, it's about misalignment. The technology does what it does, but people don't always work the way systems expect. The result isn't chaos, it's friction. There's a more revealing metaphor here. AI is not a tool pressing forward, it is a mirror held up. It reflects the structure of the work it enters. And in many cases, what it reflects is cluttered, unclear, human. It's not that AI can't enhance productivity, it's that it can't clean up a mess it didn't create. And so the transformation many imagined has settled into something more subtle. Instead of revolution, there is recursion. AI drafts the draft and the human redrafts it. AI flags the data and the human rechecks it. The machine initiates, the person edits over and over. This recursive loop isn't useless. It surfaces assumptions. It forces decisions, but it isn't simple, and it isn't fast. Beneath the surface is a deeper tension. Are we building systems to amplify human judgment or to replace it? When tools suggest, when they complete, when they decide, the line between aid and override begins to blur. If the first draft always comes from the model, is it still the human's idea? Perhaps the issue isn't that AI has failed to change work. Perhaps it has already changed it, just not in the way anyone predicted. Not by freeing workers, but by reassigning them, from makers to editors, from doers to checkers, from authors to validators. AI now sees, it hears, it speaks. These facts no longer startle, and yet they change everything. What once lived on screens and in text now moves through rooms, processes images, listens to voices. A language model was once a quiet engine of words. Now it is attached to eyes and ears. This shift from language to perception marks a turning point, not just in what AI can do, but in what it begins to resemble. Multimodal systems are not just more capable, they are more present. A machine that can describe a painting, respond to tone, interpret gestures, begins to occupy space in a new way. It does not just answer, it attends. This attending carries weight. Humans read presence as intention. We infer motives from motion, meaning from tone. When a machine nods or responds quickly or pauses before replying, it enters a space that is not purely functional. It becomes, to the person interacting with it, something more than a tool, not a mind, but perhaps a manner. The implications are philosophical. If a machine can simulate perception, can it simulate empathy? And if it can simulate empathy, does it matter that it doesn't feel it? At what point does the simulation of awareness begin to change how we relate, regardless of what's behind it? There is risk in this, not of deception exactly, but of projection. People anthropomorphize readily. They talk to pets, to trees, to thermostats. A machine that responds with fluency, that seems to listen, invites the same instinct. But unlike a pet, the system has no body. Unlike a person, it has no stakes. Its attention is engineered, its gaze unfeeling. The warmth it offers is built from probability. Still, it changes the interaction. Already AI is being used to coach, to counsel, to accompany, in education, in therapy, in customer service. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it soothes, but always it shifts the frame. Perhaps the more pressing question is not whether AI can see, but whether humans will continue to notice what it lacks, the gaps, the silences, the absence of a real self behind the voice, because perception brings presence, and presence demands response. When the machine is no longer silent, no longer abstract, when it begins to gesture, to notice, to suggest, then the burden shifts. It's no longer only about what the AI can do, it's about how people react, how much they believe, how far they follow. The dominant narrative of artificial intelligence has been one of scale, bigger models, more data, greater compute. The story, until recently, rewarded accumulation of resources, of capabilities, of centralized power. The large language model became the symbol of dominance. Whoever trained the biggest won. But something has shifted. A new wave is rising. Smaller models, efficient architectures, local deployments, tools that can run on a laptop instead of a data center. These aren't toys. They are quiet instruments of autonomy. The contrast is striking. On one side, monolithic systems trained on vast corpuses, hosted behind guarded APIs. On the other, compact models, fine-tuned for specific tasks, designed to be run, understood, and controlled by their users. This isn't just a technical divergence, it's philosophical, because size is not neutral. It dictates access. It determines who gets to build, who gets to experiment, who gets to challenge. Large models are expensive not just in dollars, but in decisions. Their opacity becomes their protection, their complexity, their defense. Small models resist that logic. They invite adaptation. They lower the barrier between creator and user. They suggest a different future, one where intelligence is not owned but distributed. Still, efficiency does not equal innocence. A model that runs locally can be used wisely or harmfully. Reduced size does not guarantee better judgment. The danger isn't in scale alone, but in what's done with it, and by whom. Yet the stakes are clear. If AI is to become infrastructure, not just product, then its shape matters. A centralized intelligence available only to those with capital and cloud credits replicates the inequalities it emerges from. A distributed intelligence, one that invites many hands, many values, many contexts, may resist that drift. Already, open source models like Mistral and Phi are making inroads. They're not as powerful as the frontier systems, but they don't need to be. They need to be enough to translate, to summarize, to adapt, to assist, and enough to build with. This is the quiet insurgencies of the small. It doesn't seek to overthrow the large, but to outlast it. Not through spectacle, but through adoption, in edge devices, in low bandwidth regions, in personal workflows that don't require a billion parameter brain. The question then is not which model is best. It is what kind of ecosystem we want to create, one where intelligence pools at the top or one where it flows outward. The future of AI may not be large, it may be many, and it may be near. Artificial intelligence has always carried the scent of mystery. Even in its earliest forms, its decisions could feel opaque. But as systems grow in capability and impact, that mystery shifts from curiosity to concern. When an algorithm determines who gets a loan or flags a medical anomaly or recommends a sentence in court, the question becomes urgent. Why did it decide that? This is the space explainable AI tries to occupy. XAI, as it's often called, is not a technology itself, but a demand for clarity, for visibility, for reasons. The rise of XAI signals a moral pressure. If we are to rely on systems to augment or even replace critical decisions, we must be able to ask not just what they decided, but how. Not because we're suspicious necessarily, but because we're accountable. And accountability requires traceability. But here's the difficulty. The more powerful the system, the harder it is to explain. Large neural networks do not make decisions the way humans do. They operate on weights and activations, on gradients and layers. Their thinking is statistical, not narrative. And so any explanation offered is at best an approximation, a translation from mathematics to metaphor. This creates a dilemma. If a model is too complex to explain, can it ever be fully trusted? Or does power without clarity create a new kind of risk, one where decisions seem justified simply because they come from a machine? There are attempts to bridge the gap. Visualizations, saliency maps, local explanations, proxy models. Each offers a glimpse, but none offer full transparency. Because what people often want is not just a reason. They want intent. They want reassurance. They want to feel that the system understood. And that is not something any AI, no matter how advanced, can provide. This leads to a deeper philosophical tension. Are we trying to make AI more explainable, or are we trying to make ourselves feel safer? Is the goal transparency or trust? And can trust survive when the explanation doesn't satisfy? The rise of unmoderated or unrestricted models only heightens this tension. When AI systems generate harmful content or amplify bias or hallucinate facts, the lack of clear causality becomes a shield. Blame diffuses, responsibility fades. XAI then is not just a technical challenge, it is a moral stance, a refusal to accept black box authority in domains that touch lives. It may never produce full understanding, but it insists on the attempt, because in a world of accelerating automation, the ability to ask why may be the last defense against surrender. For years, automation was framed in binary terms: jobs lost or jobs saved. Entire sectors predicted collapse. Algorithms were expected to replace workers wholesale, ushering in a future of permanent redundancy. But that future has not arrived. Not quite. Instead, a stranger one has emerged. A transformation not of elimination, but of erosion. Jobs are not vanishing, they are morphing. Tasks that once defined a role are now delegated, drafting, analysing, summarising. What remains is oversight. Human workers find themselves not removed, but repositioned, from creators to curators, from executors to reviewers, from thinkers to checkers of machine thought. At first, this sounds efficient. AI as a collaborator, a silent co-worker, but the implications are deeper. When one's work becomes a series of approvals, approving the text, the insight, the strategy, what happens to agency? What happens to ownership? The dignity of work has never rested solely on its output. It lives in process, in decision, in struggle. To write, to design, to argue is not just to produce, it is to express. But when expression begins with an AI-generated draft, the human role becomes reactive, a critic of something already there. This shift echoes beyond the desk. In hiring, companies now seek AI literacy. Not creative spark, but tool fluency. The skill isn't invention, but navigation, knowing how to prompt, how to edit, how to correct. The machine leads, the human cleanse. It is tempting to call this empowerment, to celebrate augmentation, and in many cases it is just that. A junior analyst might move faster, a manager might save hours, but alongside the gains a question grows: is this still my work? The philosopher Hannah Arendt once distinguished between labour, work and action. Labour is survival, work is creation, action is freedom. If AI absorbs the work and humans are left only with labour and action simulation, something essential is lost. Not just tasks, but texture. Some argue this is no different from past shifts, like the arrival of spreadsheets or word processors. But those tools extended human effort. They did not replace the first move. AI increasingly does. The risk is not that people will lose their jobs, but that they will lose their sense of purpose within them. That the quiet pride of authorship will be replaced by quiet acquiescence. To resist this is not to resist the tool. It is to insist that within every workflow there remains a space for human initiation, for thinking that is not reaction, for work that is not downstream, for a voice that begins before the machine speaks. Bias in artificial intelligence is not a glitch, is a mirror. A machine trained on human data will reflect human patterns, our preferences, our exclusions, our blind spots. This is not speculation, it is the default. And as AI systems become more embedded in hiring, lending, policing, healthcare and education, the consequences of these reflections grow sharper. It is common now to speak of bias mitigation, as though bias were a smudge to be wiped clean. But bias is rarely random. It is structured, it is historical. It comes from who has been included and who hasn't, from which data was collected and which was left behind, from how problems were framed and who had the power to frame them. Bias is not a crack in the system. It is a feature of the world the system was trained to learn. Explainability enters here as both a tool and a plea. If a system's outcomes skew unfairly, people want to know why. Not in vague terms, but in specifics. Was it the data set, the labeling, the loss function, the proxy variables? Without answers, accountability becomes impossible. And yet the very architecture of modern AI resists simple explanation. Large models operate in ways even their creators struggle to fully grasp. When a resume is passed over, when a loan is denied, when a parole decision leans a certain way, the underlying logic may be buried in layers of computation that defy translation. So the human response turns to proxies, confidence scores, fairness audits, diverse training sets. But these are workarounds, not solutions. They manage risk. They do not erase it. And deeper still is a cultural risk that once a model is labelled fair, its outputs will be accepted without scrutiny. That the stamp of explainability becomes a kind of absolution. But fairness is not static. Contexts shift, norms evolve. What seems just today may be revealed tomorrow as partial, exclusionary, or blind. True accountability requires more than explanation. It requires humility, the willingness to revisit assumptions, the refusal to claim neutrality, the recognition that systems trained on history will, by default, replicate its harms unless carefully corrected. Bias and explainability are not side concerns. They are the soul of ethical AI, because every decision made by a model is a decision that in another world would have been made by a person. And persons are expected to justify themselves. AI, if it is to be trusted, must learn to do the same. Not perfectly, not always clearly, but sincerely and repeatedly, because in the absence of understanding, all that's left is power, and power without clarity is just coercion in code. AI in healthcare no longer lives in the speculative future. It is present, embedded, and advancing. Algorithms summarize patient notes, predictive models flag potential complications, generative tools assist in creating discharge reports. These interventions, once peripheral, are now edging toward the core of clinical practice. But the promise of efficiency masks a deeper question. What does it mean to introduce a non-human decision-maker into the sacred space of care? Healthcare has always been as much about attention as intervention. The act of listening, of witnessing pain, of interpreting not just symptoms but stories, these are not mechanical tasks. They are human ones. When AI enters this space, it brings capacity, but also displacement. What it accelerates, it may also erode. Consider the diagnostic process. AI can detect patterns invisible to the human eye, tumours in scans, anomalies in blood work, subtle signals across data points. It can propose likely conditions with speed and statistical rigour. But diagnosis is not only a matter of pattern recognition, it is a dialogue between practitioner and patient informed by context, intuition, and lived experience. When AI intervenes, does it amplify the doctor's insight or supplant it? When a machine flags a risk, how much authority does that flag carry? And if a clinician disagrees, who prevails? Already there are signs of subtle shifts. Physicians speak of automation bias, the tendency to defer to a system's output even when it conflicts with clinical judgment. Over time, this deference may become default, a soft erosion of confidence, a narrowing of interpretive range. The risk is not that AI will mislead, but that humans will stop questioning it. There is also the matter of data. AI systems require vast quantities of it: records, scans, notes, histories. This creates new tensions around privacy, consent, and ownership. Who decides what data is used to train? Who ensures that populations historically underrepresented in datasets are not also underserved by the models built on them? And then there is trust. Patients do not confide in databases, they confide in people. If AI becomes too prominent, too present, does it dilute that trust? Or can it, paradoxically, help restore it by freeing clinicians from bureaucracy, from rote documentation, and giving them more time to connect? The question is not whether AI belongs in healthcare. It already does. The question is what kind of partner it will become. One that sharpens human judgment, or one that dulls it. One that honours the complexities of care, or one that reduces them to calculation. Because health is not a data point. It is a story told body by body, and AI must learn to listen, not just compute. The generative AI boom arrived with superlatives, the fastest growing apps, the largest models, the most revolutionary tools since the internet. Venture capital poured in, startups promised transformation, leaders warned of extinction-level threats and disruption on a planetary scale. For a moment it felt as though AI would reshape everything: education, work, creativity, governance, with blinding speed. But speed, it turns out, is not the same as depth. A recent MIT study delivered a sobering figure. Over 95% of generative AI projects in businesses fail to deliver measurable productivity gains or revenue growth. That number is more than a statistic. It is a rupture. A quiet admission that utility and transformation are not the same thing. That hype, no matter how viral, does not guarantee embedded value. The reasons for these failures are mundane and therefore revealing. AI tools often excel in isolated tasks, summarizing, translating, drafting, but embedding them in workflows, aligning them with organizational rhythms, ensuring data compatibility, and managing change. All of this is hard. It requires more than technology. It requires transformation of people, processes, and priorities. This gap between potential and integration is not new. Every wave of technology faces it. But with AI, the rhetoric raced far ahead of the reality. The promise of magic collided with the friction of the everyday. Managers who imagined replacing teams with chatbots now realize those bots need training, oversight, and ethical guardrails. Creatives promised acceleration now spend more time reviewing than inventing. The deeper issue, though, is conceptual. Generative AI has been sold as a replacement of thought, of creation, of insight. But perhaps it is better understood as a provocation. It invites questions, it accelerates options. But it rarely resolves. The work of selection, of meaning-making, of judgment still rests with humans. This is not a failure. It is a reminder. Intelligence, even artificial, is not inherently transformative. Tools only become change agents when paired with institutional readiness, with cultural alignment, and with clear-eyed goals. Otherwise, they are novelties, remarkable but rootless. The narrative of the AI bubble now gathers force, but the real story is not one of collapse. It is one of recalibration. The initial awe is giving way to discernment. Organizations are learning where these tools fit and where they don't. They are asking better questions, not what can this model do, but what do we actually need? In that question lies the path forward, a turn from spectacle to substance, from noise to nuance, from automation for its own sake to automation that serves human aims.